Heading into the 2023 season, the Orioles outfield might be its most stable position group. But today we're going to talk about, can anyone from the outside infiltrate the current five, and how big a part could this outfield play in the Orioles potentially getting to the postseason? That's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, February 21st, 2023, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and today we are joined by a special guest making his first appearance here on the Locked On Orioles podcast. Is a fellow Orioles podcaster, the co-host of Section 336. That is Josh Sroka. And Josh, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's just so exciting that everyone's down in Sarasota now, and we finally get to talk real baseball.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I'm really excited because today, as people listen to this, is workout number one, full workout. Everybody's going to be there. And although the game won't be televised anywhere, thank you, John Angelos, 4 days away from the first spring training game as well. So things move quickly. And I think another thing we're going to get into today, which is going to make spring training this year even weirder, is that the Orioles are going to lose two of their outfielders in Santander and Mullins to the World Baseball Classic. And so I think that event has almost kind of sped up how quickly things are going spring training wise.
Yeah, except I also like it because it means other guys are going to get a chance to really. We talked a lot during the season last year about if did Stowers get a fair shot. He's going to get plenty of time this spring. So it'll be exciting to see some of that stuff. And at the same time, we won't get to watch Orioles, but we get to watch this World Baseball Classic, which I can kind of get into.
Yeah, and we're going to have three, legit O's big leaguers with Dean Kramer in there as well, three Orioles minor leaguers also. But let's get into the outfield. This is starting our positional preview series for the 2023 season for the O's. And we're starting with the outfield because, as I said at the top, it's pretty stable. And I think across the board, most Orioles fans would predict five outfielders to be on the opening day roster. They would predict Santander, Mullins, Hayes, Stowers, and McKenna. And I think pretty much everybody across the board knows that, hey, maybe Vavra or Frazier will play a little bit of outfield, but these are your five guys. And so that's where I wanted to ask first, just to start this, as we kind of look through the group, as you think through who those 26 players will be, if everybody's healthy, do you see those being the five outfielders that make this team?
Yeah, it makes sense to go with what worked for the second half of last year. I think there's there's obviously question marks that we're going to have to get to, like Santander, how many games does he play? Because he's obviously at the top of the list of trade candidates for this season. And then there's Hayes. Can Hayes improve after last season? Or is one of these young guys going to make the case that Hayes is not the guy?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting too, because we'll get into it as well. Like, could Hayes find himself in a platoon at some point? If we see second half Hayes from last year, is he on his way out by the end of this season? I mean, that's certainly a possibility. There was a little murmurs about that obviously died down, and the Orioles, showed their commitment to Hayes, at least for now. But those are the five guys I mentioned. Everybody feels like they're going to be on the team. The other options in camp that the O's are at least going to get a look at, Namar Mazara is the one kind of first base outfield DH guy who's primarily an outfielder that they have in camp. I feel like at this point, Franchy Cordero is probably a first baseman. You really don't want to put a guy like that in the outfield. Now, the O's will probably do it in spring training just to make sure he hasn't made any incredible strides. They've also got Daz Cameron out there, a center fielder who has put up some great minor league numbers, was a great prospect, has never really worked out in the big leagues, but Mike Elias helped draft him, so that's a big reason why he's here. And then, of course, Colton Cowser is going to be there. And I actually wanted to get there briefly because nobody thinks Colton Cowser is going to be on the opening day roster, but I was wondering, what your level of interest is in just kind of getting a look at him against some major league pitching in spring training.
I'd love to see it. Again, it goes back to that whole Masson thing, and we won't get to really see it.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, I think it's good because he's not going to be an opening day, but he's one of those guys that could force his way up really fast. And we could be looking at June, Colton's up here.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because he could do a lot to get himself to the big leagues, And I almost wonder how much he would have to do, because in a perfect world, you'd say, oh, well, he could just replace Ryan McKenna whenever he gets hot. But replacing Ryan McKenna, you still would have to leap over Hayes and Stowers to really get yourself in the lineup. If Hayes and Stowers are playing well, I don't know if the O's promote Cowser just to have him take McKenna's spot. So that's going to be interesting. I think just a big picture question, though, and I'm going to answer this too, but among the Orioles outfield, like who intrigues you the most in 2023? Which of these outfielders are you most excited to see get back on the field, whether it's a question about them moving forward or just in general seeing them back out there?
As long as he is with the big league squad, I will always be intrigued by McKenna because he's got the speed to cover center field. And that's a huge need for the Orioles right now because left field is basically takes the center fielder to cover. So we know we got Hayes and Mullins that can do it, but we also know we have McKenna. If McKenna could show a little discipline at the plate, Hayes would be in some trouble.
Yeah, I think that's true because you look at the two of them. I mean, you got two right-handed hitters. You got McKenna, who, when he's hit in the big leagues, which hasn't been a lot, it's always been against lefties. So if Hayes gets really bad, I mean, could it be a McKenna and Stowers platoon that we could see at some point in the outfield? I mean, it's not out of the question.
Yeah, I just don't picture Stowers in that left field.
That's fair.
And that's where I keep coming down to is who can play that left field. Mullins, Hayes, McKenna. I don't. When you brought up Colton, I'm not sure about his speed and range out there. Maybe, hopefully, but I think we always got to keep that new left field in mind.
Yeah, and one guy I think most interested in is Santander. We're going to get to him a little bit. Just what he does this year. Is he moved to more of a DH role to open up the outfield more? Because he was okay last year defensively, but he really struggled, especially in left field, even in other stadiums. I mean, I don't think he played any left field at Camden Yards for good reason, but in other stadiums, he was just struggling out there. His body's getting bigger and he's getting a little slower because he's adding power. And as you would expect, that's taken away from his defense a little bit. But
Hyde added to that today by saying he might play some first base as well.
Yeah. And, do they slip him in there? Is he the, quote unquote backup option to Ryan Mountcastle? And does that open up, other spots for guys? And then also for Santander moving forward, like what's his role with his team? His contract is up after 2024. The Orioles have not shown yet that they're going to extend anyone on this team. And I don't think Santander would be number one, contract extension they're trying to get out there. So I just wonder, what would have to happen for him to stick around versus being traded. But we're going to get to in a second here kind of what the roles for some of these Orioles players are going to look like, what this outfield could look like. Will there be platoons? Will Santander be playing some first base? Will guys like maybe Vavra or even Frazier be out there a little bit? I'll get to that in just a second. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Built Bar. Now, if you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, well, you got to try a Built Bar because Built Bar is really the perfect snack for your New Year's resolution. Now, I know it's already February and we're getting close to March, but hey, there's some people out there still sticking to those resolutions, and Built Bar can help you because this is the first protein bar, at least that I've tasted, that actually tastes good. It really does taste just like a candy bar. All these bars covered in 100% real chocolate, and with great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. But here's the best part. You eat a Built Bar, it tastes like a candy bar, but it's only 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein in every bar. And now you don't just have to order on Built.com and wait for your bar to come in the mail. You can walk into your local Walmart or Sam's Club and head out with a box of Built Bars. That's right. They are finally in stores as well. So you can still head to Built.com, but you can also head to Sam's Club, head to Walmart, and walk out with some delicious and nutritious Built Bars. So we're here previewing the Orioles outfield with Josh Sroka of Section 336. And Josh, let's talk about roles, because I think one guy we don't have to talk about here is Cedric Mullins. He is going to be in center field. It is going to be his job. He may not play against lefties, which we can touch on a little bit, but he's going to be in there set in center field pretty much every day. Let's move over to right field. Let's start with Santander. How much do you think he's out there this year? I think if he's on the team, he's going to be in the lineup pretty much every day. How much do you think he's out there versus, as you mentioned, playing first base or DHing this year?
Well, clearly we're going to start with him out there. And we have a crowded infield of guys that are going to want to take that DH spot. we've got some veterans that are going to want days off. I love using the DH spot as a day off. So we're going to see Santander there sometimes. But come on, we want to probably trade him since we have a lot of young talent like Colton coming up down the road. So it means showing him off in right field, showing that you don't want to trade a guy who's just a DH. We don't want in that situation. He's good. He's our biggest power hitter, but he's not good enough to be a straight DH all the time. So we're going to have to show that off so we can get a good return for him. So I see him at least 5 games a week, 5-6 games a week, at least for the first 3-4 months.
Yeah. One thing we do know, he's not playing left field at the new Camden Yards. I think yes. Everybody realizes that's going to happen. But let's move over to left field because there was some worry. I don't know how much you were worried at the end of the season about Austin Hays, but I was really worried because he looked like an all-star in the first half and he collapsed in the second half of the season last year. I feel like he's built up more goodwill as the offseason's gone on. There was never any really murmurs about, Austin Hays, the Orioles non-tendering in this offseason. That was not going to happen. What do you think his role is? Can he get back to an everyday player this year?
It's funny. There was a lot of disappointment in Hays at the end, but then you look at his stats for the year overall, and it's like, oh, he and Mullins were kind of neck and neck. They were about the same type of player. But again, everyone right now, as this rebuild is, Michael Elias likes to say the rebuild is finished. As the rebuild is finished, it means that every position has someone knocking on the door, which means just okay and getting by is not going to be good enough. So I think if Hays had the best part is you want to have a lousy second half. So he's going into that offseason saying, I need to improve. If it was flip flop and he struggled and then he got it working in the second half, then he'd be like, oh, I figured it out. So the hope is that whatever was going on, maybe something was tweaked, maybe it was wear and tear, maybe it was just a long season, that he can come out and be hot again for the first half of this season and then find a way to stretch that.
Yeah, I'm unsure. I think the O's will go with him early in the year. I think Brandon Hyde, Hays at this point is kind of one of the veterans on the team. I mean, he first got called up in 2017. There's not a lot of other Orioles. He's the only guy around who maybe played on that 2017 team. I know Santander was there briefly when he came in the Rule 5 draft, and
Mullins.
Yeah. And Cedric Mullins, but there's not a lot of guys there. So he's kind of considered he was up when he was 20, but he's kind of considered a veteran at this point. So yeah, I see them giving him that role early because as you mentioned earlier, which was a good point, they know he can patrol the new left field. Like that's one thing they know he can do out there. And the Orioles are really valuing defense as they did all of last year. So I think they'll give him a shot. But if Hays is struggling, that's really where I think it becomes interesting because I don't think there'd be a spot where, the Orioles would DFA him anytime soon, but they could certainly knock his playing time kind of back down closer to what it was late in the year last year, where he was playing maybe 4 times a week instead of 6 or 7. If you're Brandon Hyde, what would you do in left field if you're forced to, only play Austin Hays 3 or 4 days a week because he's just not cutting it every single day?
Yeah. It'd go back to the first segment where I was saying Ryan McKenna. Ryan McKenna is the most intriguing because I know he can handle that defensively. And I know the way this team is built is, we've got a decent lineup, but it's really focused on defense, especially when you have pitching that you aren't so sure about and young pitching. You need that defense. We saw Buck do that years ago where he built defense around young, unproven guys. They're doing the same path. And for that means McKenna is your option out there defensively. But if Hays struggles at the plate, but everyone else is hitting around him, you might even just leave Hays out there because of the defense.
Yeah. And really the other thing about Hays too is that's a good point because if the lineup's clicking, you can hit Austin Hays 8th and, maybe above Jorge Mateo and still feel good about that. But what I will say is the other thing that comes in with Austin Hays is there's always the risk of injury because we know he gets banged up a lot. I think I feel a little bit differently than you about Kyle Stowers. I think the Orioles, if there was, just a Hays point where he was struggling, I think we could see a Stowers-Hays platoon out there because I think we don't have quite a grasp yet on who Kyle Stowers is defensively, just because there was mixed reviews about him in the minors. And as everyone knows, he just didn't play enough last year at the big leagues for us to get a really good look at Stowers defensively. So I know you kind of feel like he maybe wouldn't patrol out there. So what kind of role do you see him having? Because I think we both agree he's going to be on the opening day roster. So where do you see him fitting in?
In right field, I see him as the Santander. Like, give the older guy, the power guy, a break. Let him DH. Stowers is going to go out there, whether it's the Sunday lineup or midweek. I think Stowers gets out there a lot more. I think we see McKenna more and Stowers more than we did last year, because I think last year we were kind of just playing with no hopes. Like, we played well, we played great, it was fun. We didn't plan on getting a winning record last year. Now we know we have to build on that. So I think you're going to see Hayes and Santander out of the outfield a little bit more this year in order for longevity and rest and keep Hayes healthy.
Yeah, I think that could be the move. Obviously, now in Camden Yards, right field is the easier defensive position. So if they are worried about Stowers at all, they'd put him out there in right field. I think we're both in agreement. Cedric Mullins is the leadoff hitter once again. I know the numbers were a little bit down. Now, here's a question. Mullins hit lefties very well in 2021. That kind of led to the success. He was bad against left-handers last year. That is why Ryan McKenna played a lot of games out there. And even when Mullins did start against lefties, remember, Hyde would hit him like 7th or 8th, even if he started him against a lefty, or he'd sometimes sit him and then bring him in for McKenna once a right-hander came out of the bullpen. Would you start the year with that being kind of the plan, where like as soon as the O's see a lefty, let's say I don't even know the health of Chris Sale, but let's say they see Chris Sale in that first series in Boston. Do you think Mullins sits? Do you think he's down in the lineup, or is he just there and regular?
I mean, that's going to all be dependent on what we see in Sarasota.
Yeah.
And the nice thing is that, go back to that World Baseball Classic, we're going to get to see Mullins in some of these situations in live games. So it's going to be something we're interested to see on what he's doing. Also, that first week, don't judge what they do that first week, because they want everyone to get out on the field.
Yeah.
So yes, the first week they might do that, and then they might not do it the rest of the month.
Right. Yeah, that's true. It's another way to get McKenna out there. And it's something McKenna can do. Like, he's been able to hit lefties even when he struggled elsewhere. I just think it could, set a precedent. Maybe the Boston question, wasn't it? Maybe like at the end of April, the first week of May, are we seeing McKenna in that role? I think that could definitely.
Right. Give it some time.
Are for McKenna and for Mullins as this season rolls on. But we're going to finish up the pod in just a second to talk about some over-unders, some storylines, some stats for these outfielders throughout the season. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, the football season is over and we're close to baseball, but right now, right at the midway point of the NBA season, just had All-Star Weekend, and it's the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, and it's super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything, from the money line to point scores and threes drained. And now, listen, at this point, if you're betting on the NBA All-Star game, that's not something I've watched in a while, but I feel like if you just take the over in that game, that's probably the way to go. I think the winning team scored almost 200 points the other night. But FanDuel, they even let you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So we are here with Josh Sroka of Section 336. We are talking about the Orioles outfield heading into 2023. And Josh, I sent you before we started recording here just a few, over-under predictions to try and make some predictions for some of these Orioles outfielders as the season goes on. Now, as we know, we're recording this in late February. We haven't even started spring training games. There could be injuries, whether they arise in Sarasota or during the season, that kind of, make these points moot that we're going to talk about. But let's start here with Cedric Mullins. We had two things we wanted to talk about. The first thing that you brought up, which is a good point, is how do these bigger bases affect him? 35 steals last year. He leads the American League. Do you think he gets to 40 with the bigger bases?
Oh yeah, no question. I think he gets 40, maybe 45. The bigger base it's 3 inches larger per base. So I haven't gone out there with a tape measure, but I figure that probably adds, or that shortens your length from base to base about 6 inches. I think that makes a big difference when we see a lot of times where you're out, you're out sliding in to second base and you get tagged. So if that base is now 6 inches closer, that's going to 50-50. You're now on. So I think that number is going to go way up. And I think I know you want to talk about home runs as well. And I think they go back and forth. I think they go the same, because the fact that he's going to be on the base more, running more, means you're going to want him to play small ball. You're not going to put him in situations where you're expecting the long ball out of him.
Yeah, it was so interesting to see, you get the 30-30 season, and then you get the kind of 15 homer season. And we're kind of wondering, where does Cedric Mullins fall in on the power meter? So the next question, on the 40 stolen bases, I'm gonna say he gets there. I'm thinking he's going to be in the low 40s. They're going to give him every chance to steal. I think the Orioles have shown that. On the home runs, do you think he can get to 20? Because I think if Mullins can sit right around 20 every year and get to the upper 30s of stolen bases, I mean that's like a dream leadoff hitter right there.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think we saw where he is last year, 16 home runs a year. I think that's where he's at. I think, remember, he was switch hitting and doing pretty well 2 years ago, get that 30-30. You now have the left field wall moved out, so he's not going to get many on that side, if any. And you've got him in a different role on this team. There's guys, you're going to count on Mountcastle, Santander to hit those home runs. Even Austin Hayes had around the same number as Mullins last year. I think you're going to see other guys for that long ball. We got Adley now on this team, so you really are putting Cedric in a spot of just get on base. Don't worry about hitting, clearing the fence.
Yeah, I think he wasn't too far away from 20 at 16. I think he can get to 20. I honestly think if I had to predict a number right now, I think right on the nose, 20 home runs could be the total for Cedric Mullins this year. And I don't think it's a bad thing if he gets to 20. And as we saw in 2021, like if he's going to hit 30 and still steal the 30 bases, I mean, that's going to be amazing. But I don't know if that's the player he is moving forward. But I think, as we've talked about, we all agree Cedric Mullins is going to be a huge part of this team. We talked about this a little bit already, but Kyle Stowers, he was in a very abbreviated role. I asked you 81.5 games started. So basically, does he start more than half the games this year for the Orioles?
That's a lot. What he got in? How many games did he get in last year?
Yeah, last year, I have it right here. He was up for 48 games, but not starting, and he only got 98 plate appearances. So he basically had two plate appearances per game. So he was basically playing every other day by the time he got called up.
All right, I don't see him playing every other day. Again, this could all change with trade situations and stuff, but he has to show something early. He has to show in spring. He needs to show every time he's given the opportunity up in Camden, and because he's got Colton Cowser and other guys on his tail, so he's got to show, because those guys are going to come up and push him. And I don't see him getting to 81 this year.
Another one I brought up was Austin Hayes, and this isn't a number that's going to show everything about what kind of season he has, but can he just hit over 250? And really the big prediction is, can Austin Hayes stay healthy? That would be great. That would be number one. But if he does, can he hit over 250, which I kind of think can keep him at least near an everyday role for the Orioles?
Yeah, I think he improves. I think he bats 260 in the 260 range, 260s, because he got 250 last year, and that's with that horrible second half. So if he doesn't have that horrible half, he's way higher. So I have no doubt in Dawson Hayes that he can build on that.
I think he will hit over. I don't even think it necessarily needs to be that he plays every day. I think maybe he plays a little bit less, and maybe the stats go up a little bit. Maybe less pressure on him to be an everyday player, and he can hit that 260, 270 mark and maybe hit those 20 home runs and play good defense in left field. And I think that's what the Orioles need out of him, even if he's not an everyday player. I guess we'll finish with Ryan McKenna, because you talked about him a lot in this episode. And I think McKenna's situation is so interesting because, we talked about it before with Colton Cowser potentially getting called up. Well, if he gets called up, I don't necessarily see it being straight up replacing Ryan McKenna because they would play different roles. If the O's are going to call up McKenna, or to call up Cowser, I should say, it's going to be to play him more often than McKenna does. It's not going to be a fifth outfielder and a defensive replacement. So I put down August 2nd as the date because that is the trade deadline. Is Ryan McKenna still an Oriole after that trade deadline, August 2nd?
I think so, because I think McKenna's that bench. I think McKenna's your perfect extra outfielder, late in defensive guy, speed on the bases. So I love McKenna there. So I think McKenna stays with this team the whole season. I don't know if he ever becomes an everyday player, but I mean, Ryan Flaherty had a great long career with the Orioles without ever being an everyday player. And I think McKenna could do the same thing in this outfield.
Yeah, it's nice to have that guy who you know him. He's been in your system for a while. You know he can play all three defensive positions in the outfield. You know he can run the bases. And does he give you more than that? Sometimes he doesn't, but sometimes he can. And he can hit lefties a little bit, which the Orioles struggled with last year, so that's good. I guess the last one I'll throw at you is we already kind of established, who the 5 outfielders are on the opening day roster. Those other guys who can play the outfield, the Daz Camerons, the Nomar Mazaras, the Franchy Corderos, I don't think they're on the opening day roster. Do you think any of those guys make any sort of appearance in Baltimore this year?
No, I see no reason. I can't. If those people are up and playing for Baltimore, we have bigger issues.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it, because unless it's like Daz Cameron for a week because Ryan McKenna has some sort of quick injury,
all right,
it's probably something bad. Like if Franchy Cordero's getting big at bats, we've got some serious injury issues on this team. But I think, as we said, Josh, this is a solid group right now that the Orioles have. And it'll be interesting to see how Colton Cowser can potentially try to break into this group, because really it's kind of set with these 5 guys, and they want to get Kyle Stowers more of a look, and they want to make sure they know what they have with Ryan McKenna. So as we finish up, it just feels like, talking about the outfield, it's like we can kind of set that right now. And unless there's injuries, you almost don't have to worry about it as much. Like, you kind of know what you're going to get from, maybe not all 5 of these guys, but this group as a whole, you kind of know what you're going to get, which is always good.
Yeah, that's kind of what's odd about the entire roster, is we kind of look and know what we've got. We kind of can pencil in guys in every position, and then we're kind of like, let's just roll with it and see what happens. I think it's why we felt so strongly as fans, like, just give me a big move this offseason, because I'm confident with all these other parts. I feel okay about the outfield. Sure, Trout, give me Trout, put him in the outfield, I'll take him. But otherwise, these guys are fine. They can do the job.
And we hope they will this season. Josh, thank you so much for joining us. Just want to give you a chance to plug your show. I know you guys got some merchandise as well, if people want to check that out.
Yeah. Check out Section 336 podcasts every week, me and my brother. This is our 11th season covering the Orioles. So check that out, and check out Birdland Sports, which is my new venture this year, where I've been making some pretty cool Orioles-related shirts. So check that out as well.
Yeah, sweet. I saw Felix Bautista was rocking one as well.
That was a fun picture to get.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that was Josh Sroka. I'm Connor Newcomb. We thank you so much for listening and watching as we talk about the Orioles outfield heading into 2023. I'll be back tomorrow on the pod as we continue to cover all things from spring training, talking about kind of the big news and notes we get as the entire Orioles roster comes to Sarasota for the first full squad workout on Tuesday. That's coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.